Okay, this month is the 100th, or would have been the 100th birthday of Menachem Begin. So I wanted to do a little bit of a video presentation regarding his life. So just in case you don't know about Menachem Begin or what he's meant to Israel, you would have a little understanding. So this is a biography. I'll post the link down below from the Begin Center, and you can look there for more information about Begin. But okay, so Menachem Begin, he dedicated his life to serving his nation, and twice reached the pinnacle of his ambitions. First as a commander of the Irgun Ze'ev Leumi before the establishment of the State of Israel, and then he was the 6th Prime Minister of the State of Israel. He himself felt that even after the signing of the peace accord with Egypt, that nothing can compare to the feelings he experienced during the period of the underground, or those of a person fighting from the underground for the freedom of his nation. So Menachem Begin, he was born in Brisk, Lithuania, on the 13th of Av, the year 5673. This is August 16th, and that year would be 1913. To Ze'ev, Dov, and Hassia, because he was born on Shabbat, Nahamu, the Sabbath of comfort, following the 3 weeks of the annual national mourning over the destruction of the temples, ending on the 9th of Av. He was given the name Menachem, the Comforter. His father was secretary of the Jewish community and one of its first Herzlian Zionists. Although poor, the humble Begin home was filled with love and warmth. The parents gave their daughter Rachel, who passed away September 8, 1991, and the two sons, Herzl and Menachem, strong Jewish Zionist education. Hassia sacrificed herself for her children, of whom Menachem was the youngest, and strongly urged them to acquire a good education. At the age of only 1 year, Menachem was already witness to his first war, which at that point was World War I, which forced the family to abandon their home in Brisk and wander basically through villages and forests of eastern Poland. When the war ended, they returned to Brisk, at which time Menachem began to go to school. First to the traditional cheder, and then a yeshiva, followed by the Jewish Tachemoni school of the Mizrahi movement, the Polish government secondary school, and finally he went to the University of Warsaw. At the age of 5, he was particularly a clever boy, active, always willing to learn, and this was recalled by one of his teachers. Begin, who observed Jewish tradition all his life, refrained from writing on Shabbat while at school, and he once even failed one of a test and received a failing grade in Latin, and that was one of his favorite subjects, because he refused to take an examination on Shabbat. Already before becoming a bar mitzvah, he knew exactly what he wanted to do in his life, and when he was asked at a composition on the subject during his schooling, he said that he wanted to be a lawyer, and he wanted to help the wretched and downtrodden. Until the age of 13, Menachem, like most Jewish youth of his town, was a member of the Hashomer Hatzair, which at the time was a national scouts movement devoid of socialist content. Begin made his first speeches as member of this movement. From the very first was when he was only 10 years old. He spoke in front of a large audience at the culmination of an event for Lag BaOmer, which is at a traditional parade that was part of the Jewish youth movement. Young Menachem spoke Hebrew, delighting and enthralling his listeners. At the age of 16, he joined the Betar youth movement, and in 1930 he heard Ze'ev Jabotinsky for the first time, and that experience left a powerful and lasting effect on the young man. I was captivated by the integrity of Betar Zionism and the land of Israel. The aspirations to establish a Jewish state in our time Begin would relate many years later. In 1931, he began to study law at the University of Warsaw, and he supported himself by giving private lessons. He was a very active student in student affairs, although his involvement in public activities had begun many years earlier. Despite graduating the law school, he never practiced law, but his legal education served him well throughout his entire political career. On more than one occasion, he and his Jewish friends were attacked and beaten, but they were not afraid to reciprocate and fight back. In the university, he was among the first to organize the Jewish students to defend themselves against anti-Semitic bullies. In 1935, he completed his law studies and graduated with his degree. Betar, a commissioner in Poland. Begin soon climbed to the top of the Betar organization hierarchy, and as the commander of the Brisk chapter, he was one of 9 officers of Betar's Nitzivut in Poland. He attended Betar's second international conference held in Krakow, that's in Poland, in 1935. There he clashed with Jabotinsky in a trenchant speech he gave in the wake of the storm stirred up by the Alazarov murder. Mr. Jabotinsky may have forgotten that Ben-Gurion called him Vladimir Hitler, but our memory is better, proclaimed the 22-year-old orator before the leadership of Betar. Jabotinsky hastened to respond, "I will never forget that people like Ben-Gurion, Ben-Zvi, and Golom once wore the uniform of the battalions and fought alongside me. I am sure that if Zionism demands, they will not hesitate to once again don these uniforms and fight." After that, Begin's voice was often heard at conferences and Jewish centers he frequently visited. His articles were already beginning to be published in Betar's periodicals, the Hametzuda, the Citadel, and Hamatzrich, the Leader, and others. In 1937, Begin returned from a mission as the head of the Betar movement in Czechoslovakia and was once again found his place among the leadership in the Betar of Poland. In one incident, he organized a demonstration in front of the British embassy in Warsaw that called upon the British government to increase the number of immigration certificates for the Jews to mandatory Palestine, which had been cut in the wake of Arab terror. Begin was arrested and imprisoned for 6 weeks in Warsaw's notorious Powiat prison. This was both his first time in prison and the first time he was engaged in active conflict with the British. He warned that he would be sent to a special punishment camp if he continued with the protests of this kind, and he responded, "Our youth is willing to bear even harsher punishments and make even greater sacrifices for the land of Israel." Begin also started to organize groups of clandestine immigrants that crossed numerous borders illegally on their way to the land of Israel, and so to elude the British restrictions on the entry to what was then Palestine. At the Third International Betar Conference held in Warsaw in 1938, Begin once again clashed with Jabotinsky, this time even more forcefully. After a period of political and practical Zionism, we are now faced with a period of military Zionism, declared Begin, who spoke as the representative of the activist maximalist stream with the revisionist movement in Poland. We must gain strength so that we need never be dependent on the kindness of others. If we succeed in building up a force of this kind to help the world, we'll surely follow. At that same conference, approved Begin's proposal to change the wording of the Betar Oath composed by Ze'ev Jabotinsky. The original words were, "I will prepare my hand for the defense of my people, and only in defense will I raise my hand." And this was replaced by, "I will prepare my hand for the defense of my people and for the conquest of my homeland." Jabotinsky rebuked the young rebel, but at the same time his admiration and estimation for him grew, and in March of 1939 he appointed Begin Netzev of Betar in Poland, placing him in charge of over 70,000 young members of the movement. The official Betar pronouncement to its members said, "It was the personal desire of Officer Menachem Begin to immigrate to the land of Israel and continue his Betar service there. But the Betar authorities have seen fit to postpone his immigration for the time being and give him, at least for a certain period of time, the responsibilities in Poland." The certain period of time lasted only a few months. The Second World War broke out 6 months later, and Menachem Begin's immigration to Eretz Yisrael was delayed for another 4 years. Extremely tragic events were about to occur, but before that, on May 29th of 1939, Menachem Begin celebrated a very happy personal event. His marriage to Eliza, Menachem and Eliza met at the home of her father, Zvi, at the head of the revisionist party in Drochzin, where Begin spent a few months preparing for his law requirements. It was love at first sight. The two 17-year-old girls, twins, sat at the table, but despite their resemblance, I could immediately tell the differences between them, and I liked one of them, Eliza, right away. I decided right then that she would be my wife. Upon their engagement, Jabotinsky wrote to Begin, "Dear friend, I have a good, even very few good days in my life, but the best of them was the day when I placed the ring on the finger of my wife Eliza and said the 7 Hebrew words to her." Jabotinsky traveled to Drosin to stand next to Begin under the wedding canopy, and with him came hundreds of Begin's friends from Beitar. 4 months later, in September of 1939, the Germans occupied Poland, and Brisk fell to the Germans even before Warsaw. With unimaginable courage, Begin's father stood up to his Nazi governor to protest the arrests of Jews and demand their release. It was his last act on behalf of the Jewish townspeople. The Nazis soon handed Brisk over to their Russian allies, who held it until July of 1941. After reoccupying the town, the Germans established a ghetto, which was liquidated in October of 1942. Begin heard about his family's fate from eyewitnesses. The Germans took his mother from the hospital and murdered her. They drowned his father in the river together with 500 other Jews. The father went with his head held high, and following his lead, all the Jews sang Ani Ma'amim Be'avat Hamishicha, I believe in the coming of the Messiah, and Hatikva, after which the Germans threw them into the river. White Nights. During the period just before the war broke out, Begin was mainly occupied with organizing Betar groups and immigrating to a pre-state, which was called Palestine. The last group found itself stranded in the village of a Polish-Romanian border, Shanatayin. Begin personally supervised the group for 3 weeks. Along with it, was forced to return to the point of departure, Warsaw, but he soon had to flee from there too. The Nazis already had the gates of the city, and Begin's proposal to the Polish army to form special units of Beitar members to fight the common enemy was rejected. Begin and his wife accompanied Natan Yelin Moore and his wife, who had married just the day before. They left Warsaw and continued by wagon on foot, traveling hundreds of kilometers in 10 days to Lvov. Begin was detained by the Soviets, but because he managed to keep his real identity from them, they released him and continued on to Machov. From there to Vilnius, which is Vilna, which, although it had already been overrun by the Red Army, was given over to Lithuania with Soviet control. Vilnius of those days was the focal point for many of the Betar refugees, among others from all over Poland. Begin helped to organize them and continued his Zionist activities there. He refused to accept one of the 2 immigration certificates to Palestine that arrived, thanks to the generosity of the British government, but for the many of the Beitar members there, through the Israel office in Kovno. He resolved to remain, casting his fate together with the Beitar members that had gathered in Vilnius who were unable to immigrate. After Lithuania became a Soviet republic in 1940, Begin and his wife, along with Dr. Yisrael Eldad, Shive at the time, and his wife, hid in the home of the Catholic family of a suburb of Vilnius, who agreed to rent them 2 rooms. The news of Jabotinsky's death in New York on August 4th arrived in Vilnius somewhat belatedly, and therefore on the 30th day following his death, a special memorial ceremony was held in the local cemetery, and the Beitar members sang Hatikva in his memory.